My guest for today is the CEO of East West Bank, Mr. Jerry Ngo. We delve into different issues, talk about different topics. I hope you take something from this discussion. Anything you'd like to add?
Oh no, I think thank you again for the invite, and I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and thank you for watching and subscribe.
Yeah, thank you. Evening, Sir Jerry.
Good evening, Sir
Thank,
Michael.
thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
I know you're very busy. I know you just finished a meeting just now, so glad to see you working long hours. So, anyway, I just wanted to catch up with you, and I also wanted to hear your story. So, first, how's the banking industry in general here in the Philippines?
So, Michael, thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate it. And glad to be able to be to share with your viewers as well, right? The banking industry, I think, is doing relatively well. I think overall, it's a pro-cyclical industry, meaning it typically is ahead of the market. And I think that augurs quite well in terms of what's in store for the country in terms of the general economy. Uh, I think the banks have shown relatively good growth. Last year was a fairly good uh, year in terms of growth, both in terms of net income, but also in terms of top line growth. Your bank, East West Bank, did particularly well. I think we're very well positioned with regards to our focus in consumer lending, as well as in the priority bank, as well as in the MSME business. I think those are the three pillars that we're looking at. And so far, and with God's grace, I think we're doing fairly well. And thanks to you and your business for also for the support.
Yeah.
And that's going quite well now. Thank you.
Yeah. On a personal note, we're also very grateful for the support of
Likewise.
East West Bank. In fact, we go back, I think, 14 years when we
Wow.
started out in Cebu. I'd like to shout out also to Ma'am Jovi Abad,
Yes,
one of your
yes.
key
Absolutely.
executives. We're
Absolutely.
very happy with the service, with the support. So it's been a very wonderful relationship.
Thank you so much. By the way, we're celebrating our 30th year this year.
Yeah.
Right. So really would like to invite you guys to be to participate. But I think at some point we will do something with our partners. So looking forward to that.
Okay. Anyway, regarding East West Bank, what's the vision in the next maybe 5 years, 10 years? Because presently, it's a very fast-paced world, so there's more emphasis on digitization, and everyone's on their phones now using apps. So, what can the average Filipino expect?
Yeah. So we're a very unique bank, right? And I say this based on my experience, what I've seen in other places. I've lived in Indonesia, Vietnam. I think East West Bank is very unique in the sense that our portfolio is around 80% consumer. We're only doing around 20% corporate. Most of the banks here, and in fact the overall industry, baliktad, no? So it's around 80% corporate and only around 20% consumer. And many of those banks are starting to move towards the consumer side. And that's really a recognition of what's going on in the macroeconomy. The country is, in my mind, experiencing what we call a demographic dividend, right? So the median age of the country right now is around 26 years old. That's a very young population. I think we're one of the youngest in the region, right? And then you layer that with the fact that not only are we young, we're hitting a per capita income of 3,500 to 4,000. That makes us young, but also mid-income, right? And so if you look at the GDP print of the country, and that's why you see quite high rates, no? I think we're one of the highest in the regions, if not the world at some points, is that there is quite a fair bit of consumption going on, right? And so that's really, I think, the thrust and the theme. There will be more and more of this in the next few years, and that will spur on the economic activity. In East West Bank, we believe that we have a very important role to play. Kasi when people are at that age, and I know you're very young, but when I look back in my own life and where I could maybe create a bit of wealth for me and my family, it was when I was at that age where I took credit, I borrowed money, I bought my first house, and then if you look back, that's where you start creating wealth, not just for yourself but also for your family and for your next generation. And so we think that that's the right moment for the bank. In terms of digitalization, we've been spending a lot on digital. Uh, we've launching our new app, so that's coming out very soon. Sorry, this is not an advertisement, but we're very excited about our new app. It's coming up. We're calling it Easy Way and also Easy Biz, right? Easy because we think that it's so easy right now to make it complicated, but very few people are focusing on how to make banking easier, making it simpler, right?
Efficiency.
Exactly. But not only that, we also are realizing that people really, there was a study that, people would rather go to the dentist than go to the bank,
Yeah.
right? I mean, can you imagine that, right? And that's really because in many instances, the banks were seen as sort of necessary evils. You're in the car industry, no? People really don't want to buy an auto loan. What they really want is a car, right? A car that they can have. In the same way, people don't buy mortgages, right? They buy a house. They actually want a home, right? And so the mortgage is just something that is necessary along the way. Now, can you imagine a world where you can actually make that into something seamless,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what we're trying to do, is to make banking disappear as part of the overall
Hassle-free, no?
hassle-free.
Approach.
It should be as easy as possible, and working with with our partners, making sure that they focus on what's important, right? Acquiring that home, acquiring that car, and so on. So that's what we've been doing, and a lot of the technology right now are enabling us to do so. So we're very excited about that, and we're forcing. Well, basically, we're focusing a lot more in investing in how we are able to make those things happen.
Would you say you're up there in terms of the development of the apps? And what sets you apart from
Yes.
the others?
Thank you for asking that. We believe that we have been fairly innovative, right? But I don't think we talk a lot. We talk enough about it. So, for example, we recently were the first bank in the country to have used NFC, near field communications, right? In other places, you would see Apple Pay. So we've set up an app where it's called EW Pay, where effectively it's the same, but we use Android, where you use your phone and you don't need to bring your card. You just tap it in the point of sale machine, and then transaction goes. It has security features like biometrics and so on. But because we're a bank, it also allows you to check your statements, your what's going on, and so on. So that's kind of new, and we've been very proud that we've been the first bank to do that in the country, and that's something that we're pushing out. The other one that we're doing is we have this chatbot, which is AI uh, powered. It's called Esta. So people use it to check their accounts, to engage with us, ask questions, FAQs, but also to do transactions. So I think those two are very, very innovative. And I think layer that on top of that, we also have Como, which is our digital offering. And then recently, we're now launching Easy Way and Easy Biz. So we now have a sort of a combination of digital assets that I think could be however way you want it, right? It's not only just structured, but you can do unstructured, you can do transactional, but also informational and so on. So we're hoping that we would be able to cater to the needs of the clients in different and various ways that they do not want to be catered to. So we're very excited. We just won an award for Como as the best, I think, if I'm not mistaken, digital experience
for the Philippines.
no, for the Philippines. That's right, for the Philippines, but it was given by an international award body. We'll send you the information later. But it was a very exciting moment for us, and so we're hoping that we can put all of these things together and then offer that to our clients.
You mentioned earlier that East West is opposite from conventional banks in terms of approach. Who sets that culture or that dynamic?
I think it really starts with the DNA of the group. So as I mentioned, it's 30 years ago that East West started, but the family, the Gotianon, who, by the way, also came from Cebu, right?
Yeah.
They actually started their uh, consumer finance business, right? If I'm not mistaken, around in Binondo area, right? At the where they live on the second floor and it is at the ground
Very
floor.
Chinese style.
Very Chinese style.
I grew up that way also.
That's exactly right. So you have the
Very
the
warehouse, office,
correct,
and
correct.
bahay.
The tiamlay and then
Yeah.
the house at the top. So they had that in terms of how they started. They were into auto financing. I think this, if I'm not mistaken, 1950s pa yata. I am not sure if you know, the group was also part of Family Bank at some points. So really the DNA of the group is into consumer finance. And it's only now with East West Bank that we're starting to like really look at that and then amplify that and move that into the digital age. Speaking of digital, I was sharing with our vice chairman, si Georgie, no? She was sharing the story that her mother, si Doña Mercedes, was actually one of the first ladies who brought in an IBM mainframe, right? And that was a long time ago. And I think they were one of the first banks to have been automated and so on. And I thought that was a really a groundbreaking moment for them. And I think we're just merely continuing that tradition, both in the technology
When
side.
was that? That IBM?
I'm not sure,
Was
but
that
it must have been,
70s?
hindi naman siguro, mga 80s siguro.
80s na.
Oh, but that's still pretty early, right?
Alright.
That was still very early.
Yeah, 80s tama. IBM.
So I think that's right. But that was very early for them. But I was very surprised. But I guess to answer your question, we're just merely amplifying the DNA of the bank.
But regarding all these developments with technology, AI, I'm sure many would be concerned regarding cybersecurity.
Yes.
Because these days it's very you hear about these stories regarding hacking,
Correct.
regarding phishing. How do we ensure that everything is kept properly security wise?
I think really important is to start with knowing your clients. I think that's really the core of what banking is all about. That relationship with your clients, that you deal with them, that you know them. So we're not just going into the digital side, but we're also expanding our priority bank, right? So the priority bank is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're now up to 12 priority centers nationwide. That would make us one of the most expansive in terms of presence nationwide. So we're really focusing on that area. We're trying to also link that with our MSME corporate banking business. So it really comes down to knowing your clients, working with them, understanding their needs. Obviously, the product design is important. We believe in what we call phygital. So it's not purely digital, but it's the confluence of what is physical and digital. So I'll give you an example. The validation process needs to be escalated depending on risk. So you start off with a full online onboarding of a client. If the amounts are small and the risks are low, as and when transactions become larger, you add additional sets of checks and balances, but until such a point where you actually would want to meet the clients, right? Where the physical and validation and verification becomes critical. And I think that's the role of the branches. And that for us is the confluence of the entire journey from the physical world right through to the digital world and so on. But it all comes down to the basics, which is understanding your clients, understanding their needs, and watching out for what's different. Because normally, scams and all these things are, you can detect that if there's anything that changes in terms of their activities and so on. So I think a lot of that comes down to the basics. But obviously, you still need to invest in people, remind about phishing, fake emails, and so on and so forth. I think we just need to be keep reminded that not all actors are good, I suppose.
So there's also emphasis, right, on the experience, customer
Yes, big time.
customer satisfaction,
Correct.
of course, keeping
Correct.
your clients happy.
Yeah.
Okay. Regarding East West, are you looking to expand to more branches
I think,
around the
yeah,
country?
I think we have already around close to 500 branches together with our rural bank, right? 390 something in the universal bank and around 90 something in the rural bank. That would make us maybe in the top five, top six in terms of banks. So I think that's quite sufficient in terms of coverage with regards to our client segments. What we want to do is to give more alternatives. And that's why we're investing quite a lot on the digital channels, but not just the apps, but also, I guess I mentioned earlier, the bots, the ability to use other alternative means to connect with the bank. So that's something that we're focusing on. We're also maybe a sneak peek is that we're also looking at our formats. We're starting to reconsider uh, how our flagship stores should be formatted. We've recently launched a new segment called business class, right, where we want to target the businessmen, entrepreneurs who move around the cities and so on. And we were thinking that we should probably consider putting up a place where they could meet, lounges and so on. So that kind of leverages on the group and the group's real estate assets around the region, right? So I think it's more around how do we get better at targeting the needs of our clients, right? And the segment that we're focused on, and then identifying how we put our branches, our network, digital, and everything around it that will suit the needs of those segments. So I think to answer your question, it's maybe more rebalancing and refocusing rather than expanding in terms of numbers.
So a good balance also, because you can't also lose that personal touch,
Absolutely.
right? Because it
Absolutely.
boils down to face-to-face relationships
Exactly.
also. Because
Exactly.
you can't go fully
Digital.
robotic.
Exactly.
You can't
Correct.
go fully digital.
It's, I think the best outcome is an augmented experience, right? Where it becomes more intuitive, but at the end of the day, it's still a human being and a person to person interaction.
As long as it's well balanced, right?
Exactly. Tama.
Okay. Now we can delve a bit more into your humble roots. What made you decide to become a banker? Because I know you're also from Cebu.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
from Cebu, so
Yes.
we have Cebuano roots.
Yes.
So yeah, and it makes me proud also to see a Cebuano become a CEO of a national bank.
you.
So that's also a great testament to the resilience of Cebuanos. So yeah, maybe walk us through your
Yeah.
personal journey in your career.
I never decided to become a banker, right? In fact, I think the joke I shared with the team is no one wakes up one day and say, I want to be a banker, right? In fact, I wanted to be a lot when I was growing up, but banking and being a banker was not one of them, right? So I was born in Mindanao, right? But we moved to Cebu when I was like 7 or 8 years old. We live in a place in Sulueta, I don't know, near Parian.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think I've heard that.
Yes, it's
Familiar
it's the
street.
really old part of town. We actually live on top of a bodega, right? So I think Benedicto buildings. So they have Copra bodegas at the ground floor, and we would be on the third and fourth floor, right? It's in a place where the cats are afraid of the rats because the rats are large, right? Because they are like fortified by Copra,
I've
I
seen
guess, right?
those really huge
That's right,
rats.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was where I started. But anyway, I think most of my formative years, I went and studied high school in Don Bosco, right? So at some points, I actually thought of going to the seminary. My dad was wise. He said, it's an old boys' school. Why don't you go and figure out first, and you go and study and maybe mingle with the girls, right? And so I went and chose to go to a medical school. So I went to Veles, right? So I did my undergrad, and the reason was because I think the nursing school was beside it, so there was a lot of girls. Like my decision criteria was very simple. Um,
Yeah.
so I actually wanted to become a doctor, right? And so I took up medical technology. I did finish that, and then I actually went to medical school for a year, but it was very difficult because my dad suffered a stroke when he was 45, and so we were really hard up, right? I started working. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts in Puente. I don't know if you remember that old
Yeah.
place. Uh, and then did a little bit of odd jobs here and there. But I went to school and finished. Luckily, I had some scholarships on the side. But it was helpful. But, at some point, it became very, very challenging to continue to do and proceed to medical school and, follow that career. It was a very long duration.
So
And
that stopped you because of the
correct.
years it would
Correct.
take.
The years it would take, and I had two other younger sisters, and everyone had to hopefully have to go to school also. You cannot hug up everything, right? And I was the eldest, so I thought I actually took a sabbatical, and then I ended up working. So a friend of mine were starting a school. I don't know if you've heard of CITE in Cebu. So I was one of the earlier teachers there. I taught chemistry, but I also was doing their purchasing and so on, so helping out and so on. So yeah, first job, and then went to night school. Continued. I studied in San Jose. I wanted to do something and continue working, so I did evening classes with them. So I took up my masters with them, and then somehow I worked for a project called Pito. I don't know if you remember them, but anyway, one day Citibank was putting up an ad, and they were looking for people who wanna apply for a job in Cebu, right? So I thought I'd just apply, right? And
For Citibank. What
for Citibank,
designation was that?
okay. So
What title?
I applied for a management associate, right? So Citibank was very well known for their management associate program. And typically, it was a program that they hire from MBA schools, AIM, quite a lot, UP, MBAs, but mostly they take people from foreign graduates. But my year was a bit unique. I think Citibank at that time wanted to find someone from Cebu who was willing to be posted to Cebu, right? I think many of the earlier people who were from Manila who went through the MA program uh, were not very inclined to be posted to Cebu.
Mm.
I think the view at that point in time was that they would be forgotten. It was a small branch, and it was the only branch outside of Manila, but the action was really all Manila, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the case. So they thought maybe we'd change the formula, hire locally, send them to Manila for training, but the agreement is you come back and back in the branch. And so I applied for that. They initially offered me another job. They offered me to become a salesperson immediately, which would have paid, I think, 3,000 pesos more, which was big at the time. So I was earning like
This was 90s,
90s, early 90s, right? I was earning very little, right? And so I was like, oh, Citibank, they would give me a bump up. I'll go and apply. And then they offered me this really enticing job to do marketing, and it would pay even more. But I thought, I don't know anything about banking. I had a huge concern that I actually did not have any back. I went to medical school. I went to a technical high school. So, nothing to do with business at all, right? And so I said, why don't you consider me for the MA program? And luckily they did. I had 7 or 8 interviews. I found out later on it would normally take 3 or 4, but because they were not sure of me, they had more people to come interview more.
More assessment done.
Yes, more assessment. But I think it was also around more blame to share, just in case this guy doesn't make it or he really fails miserably. But to be fair, I am so grateful for the people who took a chance. Right? I think they took a chance. They were very, very supportive. And because they were also worried, they took me in earlier before the actual program started. And
You
so
passed
one guy,
all 8 interviews. Did you pass all
yes,
the 8?
that's right. And they sent someone from Manila. Actually, it was a shout out to Edwin Bautista, who's the CEO now of Union Bank. He came all the way. He was, I think, Tonet Ichon was the head of BDO One Network Bank, was my immediate boss. And so between Edwin, Tonet, and Flor, who was our head then, they sent Edwin to come over to vet me, right? And basically, they decided, okay, this guy, go, right? I later on, when I was on their side, I thought that was a very difficult decision to take. That would have been quite it would be so much easier to hire from the top schools in Manila, right? And or top school in Cebu. Honestly, I didn't go to a top school even in the city, right? So it was quite an interesting experience. But they were very helpful. They held my hand. They took me in 3 months before the actual training. They drilled me on accounting, what the bank does, and so on. So I had a bit of a leg up in the sense and understanding. And then I went to Manila and joined the MA program for 1993.
But prior to that, you had no banking experience, but you had an inclination towards finance, accounting. What was your course? It was just purely medical?
So no, undergrad was purely medical. So it's medical technology, right?
Yeah, but
So it's mostly laboratory science. So a lot of chemistry and a lot of biology. But I did take a management course in San Jose, and that was helpful to an extent. But I was lost with accounting at the time. I didn't have a good grasp of a lot of things.
so you had to learn the ropes quickly
Yes,
during this
correct,
period of
correct,
time.
correct.
And did you catch on quick?
Yes, yes, yes. Luckily, one thing I learned in medical school is how to study hard very quick, right? And so so that brute force and just getting on with it was very helpful. But as I said, the managers and the supervisors I had in Cebu were also very helpful. The couple of guys there, Tommy, Tito, were very, very helpful. They sat me down every afternoon and they said, okay, fine, well, why don't you? So they took me in 3 months before, trained me, and then basically said, let's prepare you to go to the actual training program. And so that was very helpful, right?
How long was this training program?
A bit longer for me. I ended up almost a year because I think the program was around 8 to 10 months. We rotated in all the parts of the bank. There was written, revalidas. There was also practical courses, but we went to the different operating units. It was really preparing one to be a general manager of sorts. In my case, I was being prepared to do operations, right? And so when I finished the general program together with my cohort, I ended up doing additional programs in technology. I did telecommunications because we were far. So I need to understand what's going on. I spent some time in financial control because I need to be able to understand what the branch books look like relative to the main office and so on.
During this time, what was your goal? What did you want to
I just
achieve?
wanted to make some money. That's all I wanted, right? At that time, I was just trying to get out of poverty, right? And so it was just to
make ends meet.
Make ends meet, exactly. My family was getting a bit more difficult at that time because, again, my dad's not been working. My mom was starting to pawn things, sell things, and so on.
And you were looking out for your siblings?
Yes.
Since you're the eldest.
Yes, the eldest, that's
and
correct.
How many siblings?
Two siblings. Yeah. I'm very focused on education. So my two sisters finished. The next generation, I think almost all of their children are also finished. We also take the opportunity to chip in for everyone, make sure that everyone finishes school. I mean, I think education at the end of the day is a great equalizer and opportunities as well. No, yeah. So yeah, I mean.
So the education was, you would say, instrumental in leading to your success, eventual success.
I would say so. I never stopped studying. So I actually went back to business school in around 2000. So I went to Chicago. So I went to Booth School of Business. So it was called GSB at the time, Graduate School of Business. So when the University of Chicago opened up a campus in Singapore, I applied. So I took that and I studied in Singapore. I spent some time in Barcelona, but also in Chicago itself, no? And that was very helpful. That kind of gave me some underpinning. And then subsequently, around 2015, I went to Harvard. So I went and did my advanced
That's quite
management
recent,
program.
2015.
Correct. It's fairly recent. I think one should go back to school maybe every 10 to 15 years, just to refresh, to think about how things are. I think the frameworks change. I think the cohort have changed. But I've also benefited a lot because you've changed because you're older, right? The first time I went, I didn't understand much. I went to Chicago. That gave me a lot of the foundational technical skills. They were very quantitative. They were very focused on econometrics. They were very focused on accounting. They were focused on strategy. And that was very, very helpful. Harvard was a bit different. Again, I was much older. I was a CFO already at the time. I was with a private equity group, and the mindset was a bit different. But I think one should always go back to school. Yeah, I actually went back to school during the pandemic also.
Online courses?
No, we started in 2018 and we finished in 2022. I went to a theological college, so we studied theology.
Theology?
Yes.
You strike me as a very dynamic, versatile individual because you mentioned you went to a seminary, then you studied.
No, sorry. I thought about it.
Thought about
that's right. I didn't go.
But you mentioned now theology.
Yes, yes.
So
Sorry.
there's that. Then you went into medical school.
Yes.
So it's very dynamic
Yes.
that you ventured into various
Yeah.
fields. But what would you say is your forte, or what's your knack, or what's your strong suit out of all these different fields?
So we did a profiling, and I think the team also did our own profiling. I think I came out as a learner, right? I think that's kind of what kind of differentiates or so I love to learn, and I think curiosity is I'm always curious, right? So that ability to be curious and to continue to learn is important. That's something that I have tried to impart to my children. How you start in life should not determine how you should end, right? I mean, anything in between should be dependent upon you. And even now, it's even more so that the opportunities are there. Now, you can imagine what's already written in Wikipedia, for instance, right? The internet is such a tremendous resource.
Easy
access to
information.
Correct. But also to misinformation.
Yeah,
right?
So there are some tricky areas.
Correct. And I think what's important is the ability to do critical thinking, right? So critical thinking, critical frameworks becomes important. Both our children went to this IB, International Baccalaureate, but it's really because we believe in the liberal education, right? Which I think is very important, that people have a broad education of various pieces.
Well-rounded, right?
That's right. I had to do it in different stages in life. So I started in a technical school, which is more engineering, medical, and so on and so on. But then you kind of evolve as you go along. Anyway, so that's kind of
So what are your future ventures? What do you plan to do next?
I think we have a lot of challenges that we want to get done in East West Bank. So we've just embarked on a 5-year strategy. We really think that we have a big opportunity to make an impact on not just on our own results, but also with our partners, but as the country as well. Personally, I would like to be able to transition access to credit, where there is access to credit to everyone, where I think credit scoring, credit bureau becomes the norm, where people are able to have access depending on how they behave and how they treat their experiences, are able to access credit. Because I think a population of 26-year-olds really need the opportunity and the chance. And that opportunity and the chance is to create wealth for themselves for their family and for their future, right? This is once in a lifetime, right? You've seen what happens. I'm now Singaporean, right? So when I go home every time, uh, I'm kind of like middle age because the median age in Singapore is 49, close to 50, right? Japan a bit more, Korea also about the same, uh, and even Thailand has also aged very quickly, right? So I think that's what we need to do is to give the opportunity to achieve some wealth status before we get old as a population. So I think that's kind of what I want to do. Personally, I want to see my kids established, right? So out of school, finish everything. Hopefully, they have their own families and so on. Simple things.
Delving more about AI,
AI, yes.
many people voice out certain apprehensions regarding AI.
Yes.
That it's scary. What's your take on artificial intelligence and
I think
the dangers or pitfalls?
I think it's like anything else. It's like a tool, right? I think in the earlier stages you need to have guardrails. Uh, there are talks about hallucinations. I probably heard about that, where AI engines have basically hallucinated and created a different narrative and a description and so on. But I think there is a lot of uplift in terms of productivity, right? There's a lot of capability that it can provide. I'm starting to use Copilot, right, which is from Microsoft. Fantastic. It summarizes my emails in the morning. I want to write something. I mean, it helps me a lot in terms of, but at the end of the day, it's still me, right? I have to be responsible for what I send out. I have to be responsible for how I make decisions based on the selective information that I've been given. That integration, that responsibility still needs to be with the person. But I am a firm believer that it will change a lot of the way how we do things, right? And it could uplift quite a fair bit in terms of productivity. So I'm a cautious supporter, right? Call it that. And I think what's important is to provide the guardrails, the frameworks, the governance, so that it doesn't go astray, right? We're using quite a fair bit here. We're helping out on trying to use large language models. We have a bot that we tried to teach Bisaya, right? It sounds odd, but it's really quite interesting. Because it speaks as if it is a very formal academician. And so the question is, how do you make sure that it becomes a bit more colloquial, a bit more engaging, and so on? So I think still some ways to go, but the potentials could be quite significant. But you just need to be able to manage it, control it, govern it properly, right? And then just make sure that the use cases are appropriate. In our case, what we need to do is to use it for our people so that when they interact, they become better. We haven't gone to the point of exposing it directly because I think there's still some concerns that we need to iron out.
Okay. Delving more into the economy of the country, how do you foresee the Philippine economy? Because recently it looks good now, everything. Yes. People are in buying mode.
Yes.
People are spending.
Yes.
Any threats or challenges that you foresee down the road?
Yes. I think I'll split that into external and internal. Internally, I think you're absolutely correct. That buying, that consumption is driven because of a population that's young, a population that is aspirational, right? And a population that is relatively wealthier than what it was previously. And once you reach a certain per capita income, certain age, your needs change, right? Aspirations change. People want to travel, people want to buy a home, and so on and so forth. So as that change happens, it creates an opportunity for the country to uplift, right? I think that is very important. What's critical, I think, is to be able to provide employment opportunities or productive opportunities for the people that we have. Because I think young population needs to be engaged, needs to be productive, and needs to be able to generate capacity or to create wealth, right? What could potentially derail it, in my mind, is the fact that we have a very low savings rate. So our capital formation in the country is quite limited, right? And in order to create that next stage, you need capital. So I think we need to be a bit more open with regards to foreign direct investment. I think there are certain sectors that need more competition. I think we need to be exposed more with the rest of the world. You mentioned about the banking industry. I've been away since 1998. So I was expatriated by Citibank in 98, and I did not come back until 2022 late. So I was out for a long time. Um, it's actually sad to say that some other countries have outstripped us, right? Indonesia, we used to export people there. I think they're now a few years ahead of us in terms of development. Same thing for Vietnam. They've kind of just leapfrogged. And then never mind Indonesia, Malaysia, or Singapore even. And those guys have really just outstripped us. So I think what we need to do is to be able to open up and really catch up. We spoke earlier about COVID. I think the Philippine digital penetration was very, very low before COVID. And during COVID, we were forced. Right? The other countries were already ramping up. Right?
Even prior to the pandemic, but with the Philippines,
Yeah.
we were forced to.
Exactly. We were forced to accelerate that whole process. And I think that's what we need to do, is to accelerate that much faster, because I really think that we really need to catch up in some of the things that we're offering. No? Not just for payments right now, which is kind of prevalent, but more around credit, access to financing, and so on. Externally, my biggest fear is around great power rivalry, right? Particularly between the US and China. And you kind of, I also study quite a fair bit of history, and it's always worrying when there are great power changes and shifts, right?
Yeah. It seems to be shifting more towards China now.
Well, yes.
And there's a lot of chaos.
Correct. And
surrounding
that's
the
a problem.
US.
Because any of that
Political-
shift will create chaos.
Yeah.
Right? I hope we are not we're not caught in the crossfires. Right? Unfortunately, we're in the vicinity, and unfortunately also we have some issues. Right? And I think that's something that we probably should try to see if we could avoid. Right? Because that is really important, that we have this generation that can actually surpass. We need to get wealthy before we get old, right? And I think that's something that I think our leaders should think about, is how to give that opportunity. And some of that is around stability, right? You need to have a stable economy. You need to have a stable environment where people can get on with things and focus on their lives. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have that. I think there will be more volatility, there will be more variability, chaos, as you mentioned. But as they say, there's also opportunity in chaos, right? So I think that's also the flip side to the whole thing. But I just wish we have some stable time that we could actually grow our economy. It's our time, no? I really should think so.
But what can you say about this generation presently? Because it seems values have gone down. This TikTok generation, where there are a lot of easily triggered people,
Yes.
very sensitive. How has it changed in comparison to decades ago? The culture, the mindset, the value system.
I think we're all influenced by our own experiences, right? I think that's kind of how I see this. And I think I don't blame the current generation, because I think the media, the social media, the technology that is being thrust upon it makes the attention span very, very short.
Yeah, short attention.
Very short attention span. The news cycle has become very, very short. And as you've said, engagement has changed a lot. right? When I was growing up, there was nothing like phones or anything, so we're forced to play sports, right? And sports was very important, so very big part of.
Also socially.
Correct. You don't have a choice, but you have to engage, right?
Yeah.
And so someone hit you, it doesn't matter so much. You hit back, and it's okay, right? I grew up in Boys Town, right? So it's pretty rough, but they were all focused on getting people to be active, and that I think has started to shift, right? People live more solitary lives, even if they're connected, which is a bit strange, right?
Just at the push of a button now.
Correct.
Everyone's just online.
Correct. But you're not necessarily connected, right? You're linked, but you're not really connected.
Lack that human touch.
Exactly. There is no empathy. There is no discussion. I remember talking to the phone before, seeing people going out for drinks and so on. It seems to be a bit less so nowadays. I do see a lot of people going out in BGC, which is quite interesting. But I think that will also evolve. There's also been a lot of people whose one or two parents are working outside of the country. And I also start to see that as people growing up with their grandparents or extended families and so on. I think it's a bit sad to think about it. I was fairly lucky that even if we were outside, I was able to bring my wife and my immediate family, right? So we were still together even when we were outside. And I thought, in hindsight, that was a huge grace and a favor for us, right? Because otherwise, it would have been very, very difficult.
What can Filipinos expect with East West in the next few years?
Yeah. Excitement.
Excitement.
No, I think we're really pushing the envelope with regards to digital, right? We're pushing the envelope in terms of consumer lending, right? If there's an impact I want to make, it's really around how people can graduate with regards to their access to credit, right? Right now, what we've started to see is a lot of online borrowing, but they're still at very, very high rates. Usurious, if you really think about it. Parang yung 5-6 was moved online, right? I think what's important is that there should be a social construct and a contract where I don't know you, and so therefore I will charge you high. Mm-hmm. However, as when you get to know each other more, right? We do a few transactions, you do well, you pay well, you behave well, things go well. I should be, as a bank, be reducing my price, increasing the loan amount, and extending the tenor, right? And then to an extent that it will then open up other things, right? It should be allowing you to acquire your first, motorbike, go on a first foreign trip, get a car, get a home, or go for your wedding, get a home, insurance for your family, and so on and so forth. That entire life cycle is something that we are very focused on, and that's something that I find very interesting, again, because of the demographic age, the per capita income that we're in, and where I think banks can play a role.
Going back to earlier, you mentioned there's a lot of misinformation also in the internet. How would we discern what's true, what's not true?
Yeah, actually, that's very difficult, honestly, right? Because there's a lot of deep fakes nowadays, right? I actually think there's some reason to paid media, right? I mean, I think Australia passed that law earlier where you have to pay the sources and so on, right? From an economics perspective, I have some problems with that because that's like taxation, right? However, from a way to go through the whole thing, there is also some benefits in having reliable media that is held accountable because there's a contract to do and deliver what's right is very critical. I remember my time when we'd go and listen to the BBC, right? AM radio in the evenings, no TV. So listen to the BBC. You'd think that is, and you'd give some level of respect for that. I mean, today I listen to them via Spotify, but it's it's something like that where I think there's an important opportunity to be able to articulate uh, the narrative that is factual, right? Because once you have fact, you will have truth, right? And the ability to discern what's truth gives you the ability to trust, right? So, you know, facts, truth, and trust then creates the social cohesion. So I'm hoping that that allows us to do so. Um, the other thing is around institutions, right? I think a lot of issues right now are because of the erosion of trust on institutions. So I think that's something that we probably need to think about in terms of how we discern the truth, but also in terms of who do we trust.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be quite challenging because of the fact that a lot of it is not just being eroded, but it is being actively undermined.
And I think biases also,
Absolutely.
that's unavoidable. Narratives
Absolutely.
are pushed, and
Absolutely.
somehow it's dependent on who's in power,
Correct.
who's in charge.
Correct. It's yes. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
it's
but,
become
but that's
a
humanity.
tool, no?
That's
Yeah.
human nature.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you can just hope for the best.
And that's why I think education is important, right? Bullshit meters, right?
Yeah, yeah. You can
The more you're educated, the more
you can
you realize
smell that
exactly,
there's
right? Something fishy.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that we really need to be able to do is to discern more, right?
Okay. Delving more into management,
Yeah.
leadership, what are some advice you can give regarding management approach, dealing with people, combating uncertainty, facing failures?
Okay. Let's start with the last one. Facing failures, treat them as lessons learned, right? I always believe what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Kind of like the vaccine formula. But I think it's important. You just need to be able to take it on stride and then move on to the next one, right? So I think that that's always critical. Resilience, I think, is very important. With regards to management and leadership, I think it's very important to be able to bring people together. I think that's important. A lot of the issues right now are when people are unable to articulate what they think. I think being able to engage and get people some space to express is very important, right? It's a bit slower, right? But I think the buy-in is important and it gets it deeper. And people are then able to take it forward rather than you continuously pushing the agenda, right? Clarity, I think, is also important. So one of the first few things that I did when I took the role was basically uh, to 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 express a strategy, right? And so we came together as a management team. We developed our strategy. We defined the areas we want to go for, areas that we don't want to go, and areas in terms of how we go to market and all these things. So we defined that, um, and we keep repeating that. And when we cascaded it down, and then we identified how that all comes together. So the clarity, the consistency is very important. Um, I just saw a TED talk the other day that the best type of management is boring management, right? And I thought there was some reality because we tend to think of managers and leaders as the ones who are charismatic and all these things. But when times are difficult, would you go with a guy who is, a showman, or would you rather go with someone who's planned it well, who's
Competent.
thought this through, who's done it before, and so on, right? So I thought, you know, sometimes I could be guilty of basically be a bit more showing showmanship more than anything else. But the reality is that you really need to get down to the basics. I think I learned that the hard way because I went into banking with very limited uh, exposure. I had to learn a lot of that along the way. I would say even that for the longest time I had a chip on my shoulder. but I really wanted to be able to say that I know this. So that's why I went back to school many times, but also gotten myself exposed and so on. So I think getting ready is always good. Engagement is really important, and I think just need to do the basics right and do it well, no? And I think execution also is a really important part of the whole thing.
Going back to your career, what was the worst point in your life, and how did you bounce back?
I'd say more recently. Uh, so uh, my mom and dad passed away, right? And that was not too long ago, right before the pandemic, around 16, 17. But the reality was that we've always thought about coming back home and getting reunited. And we've thought about it. We've bought places here. We visited them, but it's always like, oh, okay, fine. I'll do one more year of this, or no, I'm doing so well and making so much money. Why don't I continue doing this abroad, right? And what will I do when I come back home? Uh, anyway, and then one fine day, they passed away in rapid succession. 3 months after my mom died, my dad passed away. And so I think that was quite a sad thing, which is, it should have been something that you know, should have spent more time. You realize there's so much more important things in life, no? How did I bounce back from it? I'm a bit more conscious about spending time, right? And then making sure that I reach out and so on. My children are both out. My daughter's in Singapore, my son is in the US. We try to reach out to them, talk to them, and so on. Luckily, they also do the same thing with us and so on. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's so much more to life than just your career or making money and so on, right?
Yeah. Family, of course.
Family relations,
Mm.
right? I think that's very important. Community becomes very important.
We went through a pandemic, and in fact, in Cebu, we also went through Typhoon
Yes,
Odette.
yes.
So a lot of calamities and
Mm.
trials. How did you overcome during COVID for East West?
I wasn't in East West at the time.
Oh, that time.
No, I wasn't.
Oh.
I was out of a job during the pandemic, right? So uh, I left my old job in 2018, right? My wife had some illness, and I think at that time I decided, life is short, right? And this is after my parents had passed away. So I told my boss at the time, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna spend time. So we actually traveled for a while. So we traveled for almost 2 years, right? Going around, just seeing, ticking off our bucket list. We went back to school, we went to the theology class. We were classmates and so on. So we had fun. And then the pandemic hit. At that time, I was in Singapore, and Singapore is one of the most orderly places in the world. So they actually had a really good response to pandemic. I In a way, we spent more time as a family because of it. Because my son came home, my daughter came back, so we were all in one place. They couldn't go out, so they were stuck with us. We actually reconnected. We, played a lot of games, entertained ourselves. I don't know. I mean, some people have very different experiences during the pandemic. It got us closer, right? Which is quite unique, I think. I'm very, very grateful for that. And then I started my own advisory work at that time. And so that was also quite interesting. I was on my own and so on. But it was definitely a weird moment. It was a sad moment for a lot of people. A lot of people suffered. Personally, very grateful. We actually got closer as a family because of the pandemic.
Okay. What advice can you give the average Filipino regarding investments, regarding business?
So let's start with business. The returns to business or the returns to capital is infinitely so much higher than the returns to employment. Okay? So wherever and whenever you can, especially when you're young and you have some family members that can support you, I would recommend take the risk. Take the risk, go to business. I did not have the capital, right? And so I stayed working. And maybe I'm also grateful that my career path took a good turn. But I think the opportunity to go into business is so much more. The other thing is that you can actually contribute to the economy much, much more. Because when you're in business, you hire people, you go into with your suppliers that will also hire other people and so on. So the multiplier effect is so much more if you're in business. There's risk, obviously, but I think when you're young and you have capital and you have family that can support you, give it a go, right? Think it through, obviously. Write out a good business plan, and then, I would say try it, right? My daughter she started her own tech startup very early on, and we supported her to do it and so on. But now she's with Google. She went big tech, but it's okay because that helped her in terms of her own career, made her a very differentiated candidate when they were looking for that job at Google. She's with YouTube actually. But the reality is that there's a lot more that you can do if you're on your own business. In terms of investing, I'd say start as soon as you can, right? So asset classes tend to grow over time, right? Equity tend to grow over time. The more this thing about the time value of money. I am really a firm believer of that. And I think the moment you can start to invest, start. Don't do big. I think what's important is the discipline to put something aside every month, right? And I think that's very critical. There's this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Kiyosaki. Very simple, very, very practical. I can draw equations on that one, but the reality is it's a very practical book, right? Multiple sources of income so that you're diversified. Start early because time of value of money helps you. I think that's a really good way to think about it. And then allocation of assets is very important. Asset class allocation is very critical. Don't put all your eggs into one basket. Diversify a portfolio. Create a portfolio that aligns to your risk appetite, and your risk appetite changes over time, right? As you go through, the younger you are, the more risk you should take. And the reason is because if you fail, you can start all over again. The older you are, the more cash, less risky, because you want the steady income and so on. And so that life cycle approach is also quite helpful. But I think it all comes down to discipline, right? It all comes down to putting in a little bit every day, every month, every year, whatever. You have a bonus, don't spend it all, right? Put a little bit aside for this whole thing.
What's your general philosophy in life? Your general outlook?
My general
What keeps
outlook.
you motivated to move forward?
I'm a strong believer in my faith, right? So faith keeps me going. I think that's very, very important. I think me, my wife, my family, we try to put that together. So I think that's important. Believing in something that is bigger than yourself is, I think, critical. Right? I think it is when you start thinking and revolving everything to yourself, then we have all these other issues, right? And so, believing in God, I think, is important. Believing in doing what's right for your fellow man is also very critical. Right? So I think those are the things that there's also this thing that I remembered before, which is let us try to leave the world better than when we found it. Right? I think that's important. That keeps us that discipline and that responsibility.
What are your religious or spiritual views?
I'm very Catholic, right?
Catholic.
So I'm Catholic from that perspective. I think from that perspective, I think it is very difficult to argue that there is a God, right? So you can do that from a philosophical perspective without any religious views, right? So philosophically, Aquinas had this 5 ways, and you can actually argue each way
Arguments for the
for the
existence,
existence of God, right? Uh, and
even without religion.
even without religion, right? And that is really, and I recommend everyone to just go through that, and because that's really helpful, right? Or go and travel. You will see the beauty of the world and how the universe is organized. Physics and chemistry should lead you to the point that it cannot be disorganized, right? There's this thing in chemistry called molarity, right? Which is a certain composition of one substance links in with a certain substance at the right combination. Why? And it's very interesting. And then the more wise that you go down to the atomic, subatomic level, and all these things. So
that would be a very long discussion.
exactly
if we
right.
delve into
Yeah, that's right. We go into cosmology very soon.
Metaphysics.
Exactly, go into metaphysics and so on. But I think that is very important. But having that grounded is, I think, important, right? Even from a day-to-day living, right? I cannot imagine if all I think of is just this,
Yeah.
right?
There's a sense of purpose.
Correct.
The
Because
things
if
we
I'm
do.
only just doing this and this is it, it cannot be,
there
right?
has to be an aim
Exactly.
or a destination somehow
Exactly.
throughout this journey.
I completely agree, right? And that's the right thing to say, which is this is nothing but a journey, right?
Okay, on a lighter note, what's a usual day like for you, and how do you balance work and family? How do you stay active?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you're not too stressed?
Yes. Well, I have good staff and friends around who are bossy. I'm just kidding. But they keep me sane. No, but seriously, I think I I I exercise regularly. So recently, I've been swimming. So I swim around 20 minutes every day, and then I walk from home to the office. That kind of takes like 20 minutes each way, 10 minutes each way. That's good. And then I have a walking pad in my office, right? So long meetings. So my meetings now are not in terms of minutes, but in terms of kilometers that I can walk. So I rate different types of minutes depending on how much I can walk on my walking pad. So very good investment. Shout out to Xiaomi, right? Cheap, but it's really helpful. And then most of my day is around meetings, right? So a lot of internal meetings, a lot of what we call cadences. So the bank would kind of organize different uh, groups of discussions. Again, just to make sure that everyone is aligned in terms of strategy, but everyone is also coordinated across what they're doing, right? And so we have different units that are coming together. Just today, we had our product development cadence, and I thought that was a very good conversation. We explored different roadmaps, different things that we will do in terms of digital channels, what product we want to develop, and so on. So it was very, very helpful. But it's never the same. There's risk, governance, technology, operations. You name it, right? So there's different things that you need to consider. And then I I break off I go to mass lunchtime wherever I can, just to allow that time to remind me that it's not about all this. So and my wife comes and joins me. So that's a good time for us to see each other while we're not asleep, right? So that's helpful. And then work again. I normally end up a bit 7:30 or something, so that's not too bad. Uh, and then the following day again, and so on. So it's and then clients. So we do client events, meet with clients, go out, and so on. So that's something that I want to do more, right? Because meetings can like drag you so much, right? But yeah, so I mean it's been good. I mean, you cannot complain.
In terms of the Philippines, how far behind are we in comparison to other countries?
In what sense?
Uh, well, progress economically, can we catch up to the rest of the neighboring
Yeah.
Asian countries?
So I think just from a context, Indonesia was behind us in per capita income. They've they've outstripped us, right? And they have 250 million people. We're 110, 120, right? And we were at one point we were sending people to Indonesia. We were actually much ahead of them. Um, Even I think Vietnam has uh, outstripped us on a per capita basis, right? I think we have an opportunity now because our growth rate should be much faster because of this demographic dividend. What we really need to think about is what are the things that we can do as a country that will accelerate that even further. To my mind, that is capital, and that should be, I think foreign capital should be part of that. We should invite that to come in because you cannot just work, continue doing. You need to be able to build capital formation, right? Not just the day-to-day activities, but you need to be able to build something, right? Go into automation, go into manufacturing, go into so that you can then create economies of scale. I think that's what we really need to do. Intellectual property is important. We need to invest in education. As a country that actually sort of exports labor, either physically via the OFWs or as service export through our BPOs and so on, we need to ensure that the inputs are at the highest price point as possible. And the way you can do that is to make them very competitive educationally, right? So if you think about if your people are your product, you want to make sure that you have the highest specs for those products, right? And the only way you can do that is to create that educational facility and capability that will allow them to create and access that price point. So I think there is quite a lot of things to do, but I think the opportunity is here right in front of us, right? Because demographic dividends are not, are very powerful, right? And so, because it's really more people participating in the economy, right? And so that's what we need to do is to figure out how we can accelerate that even further. I think technology is important. I think educational investment is important. And I think openness to capital and foreign capital is important. I think there should be more competition also, right? Because the lack of competition stymies innovation, stymies growth, right? Over the long run.
Okay. I think we covered on
Quite a lot.
quite a lot today.
You're very well prepared, by the way.
A parting message to whoever might be watching this, maybe your clients, maybe future clients,
Yes.
or just the average person trying to get by, or someone in your field who wants to make it also.
Yeah.
Any parting message?
No, I wish the country well. I think there's a lot of opportunity, as I mentioned. We're at a stage of our development where the future is really bright. I think carpe diem, seize the day. I think it's our moment. It's our moment to really shine, uh, and I think we can all pull through as a country to go forward. And for the clients at East West Bank, I really wish to thank you all. Uh, Thank you also, Michael, and your
Thank
family.
you so much.
Really appreciate that. And we're really looking forward to doing more. Really excited about the prospects. Our 30th year anniversary is in front of us. I haven't spoken about this, but I wanted to do a hyper localization where we focus on a few cities and be very mindful about the presence of the bank in those cities, uh, providing unique services to the community, right? And so, looking forward to that. And again, uh, God bless to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank
And
you.
shout out to all East West Bank
Yes,
associates.
yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
for all the support also.
Thank you.
I
And
hope
maraming
you
salamat, everyone.
learned something today. Thank you.